you will give the people of Earth an ideal to strive towards.
Christopher Nolan and Zack Snyder originally planned to make a trilogy of Superman movies. Even though the first one, Man of Steel, had mixed reviews and some controversial choices, it got a sequel. However, instead of continuing the original plan, the sequel became Batman vs. Superman: Dawn of Justice, bringing Batman into the story. This changed the initial idea Nolan and Snyder had for Superman's movies. Before Man of Steel, Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight had already put DC in the spotlight for superhero movies. Nolan's Batman Begins successfully rebooted Batman's story 8 years after the not-so-great Batman and Robin. But nobody expected The Dark Knight to have such a big impact on the audience and the entire movie industry. Man of Steel was intended to be like Christopher Nolan's Batman Begins, but for Superman. This makes sense because both movies were produced by Nolan and written by David Goyer. They share similarities, like a non-linear narrative, which means the story isn't told in a straight line. This helps speed up the storytelling, similar to what Goyer did in Batman Begins. Man of Steel aimed to make Superman more grounded in reality, just like Batman. While Superman can't be as realistic as Batman, the movie tried to keep things believable. Zack Snyder, the director, turned Krypton into a high-tech world and explained the superpowers scientifically. There was even a scientist character, Dr. Hamilton, who played a role in explaining the powers of Superman and other Kryptonians. This approach brought a sci-fi element to Superman on the big screen, a first for the character. All these choices show that the original plan for Man of Steel was to kick off a Superman trilogy, much like how Batman Begins started the Dark Knight trilogy. The idea was to follow a similar pattern for the Man of Steel sequels. The original idea for Man of Steel 2 was to have a smaller story compared to Batman vs. Superman. Zack Snyder, the director of both movies, initially wanted Metallo as the villain for the Man of Steel sequel. There were even concept art and plans for Metallo, but those were changed when Warner Bros. Requested Batman be included in the film. Interestingly, Snyder did want to hint at Bruce Wayne in Man of Steel 2, possibly in a post-credit scene, as a way to show Batman exists in that universe. In Man of Steel, there was already a Wayne Enterprises satellite. However, the plan changed, and Batman became a significant part of Batman vs. Superman instead. This meant that Batman vs. Superman couldn't follow the smaller story originally intended for Man of Steel 2. It's crucial to note that Christopher Nolan, who was involved in the earlier Batman movies, was not actively part of Batman vs. Superman or Justice League. This resulted in the original Superman franchise plan before Man of Steel being quite different from what eventually became the DCEU. In 2012, the success of Marvel's The Avengers, which brought together superheroes from different movies, prompted Warner Bros. To launch their own shared universe. Before that, Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy was a major influence on superhero films. However, the Avengers' innovative approach to combining characters from various series in a comic book crossover style changed the game. The Marvel Cinematic Universe strategy proved successful, earning $1.5 billion at the box office. Now, every studio wanted to create their own superhero team-up, but Warner Bros. Had an advantage with DC Comics. Unlike other studios, Warner Bros. Already had a comic book universe with characters like Batman and the Justice League. This is why they decided to include not just Batman, but the entire Justice League in the sequel to Man of Steel. Looking back, it seems that Man of Steel might have been more successful as its own standalone franchise, rather than the beginning of the DC universe. The Dark Knight trilogy became iconic without being part of a larger story, and the same could have happened with Man of Steel. Zack Snyder's take on Superman was divisive, making it challenging for the character to be the center of a bigger DC universe with multiple characters and filmmakers. If Man of Steel 2 avoids heavy connections to the larger DC extended universe, it could have more freedom to tell Superman's story without affecting the future of a vast franchise. Henry Cavill's Superman could even appear in a movie outside the shared DCEU continuity, similar to the Batman or Joker. A solo Man of Steel 2 could be judged solely as a Superman movie sequel, unlike Batman vs. Superman, which had to serve multiple purposes simultaneously. While it's uncertain if the original plans for Man of Steel 2 would have been better received than Batman vs. Superman, a true Man of Steel sequel could have been more in line with Christopher Nolan and Zack Snyder's initial vision for the Superman franchise. It's unlikely that Zack Snyder or Christopher Nolan will return for Man of Steel 2 due to their issues with Warner Brothers. Nolan had concerns about the studio's decision to release movies on HBO Max, and Snyder had disagreements over the extensive editing of Justice League. Despite the release of Snyder's cut on HBO Max and fan requests to follow his original 5-film plan, the studio seems to view Snyder's darker version of the DC Universe as a creative dead end. Warner Brothers aims to refocus on an interconnected universe and hints at a Superman vs. Black Adam showdown, potentially leading to the kind of tie-in complexity that affected Batman vs. Superman. However, there are still ideas from Nolan and Snyder's Man of Steel sequel plan that the new Superman film could use. A smaller-scale story could help avoid issues seen in some previous DCEU movies, introducing a new Superman villain like Metallo, who hasn't appeared on the big screen before, could bring freshness. While the exact vision of Man of Steel 2 by Nolan and Snyder may not happen, DC could draw inspiration from their plans to create a fitting sequel for Superman. Now, one thing is that it's possible that Henry Cavill could appear as Superman in the upcoming Woman of Tomorrow movie in James Gunn's DC Universe. Millie Alcock has been confirmed to play Supergirl, so there might be a chance for her character to face off against Henry Cavill's Superman in the film. This clash between Supergirl and Superman could bring an exciting dynamic to the storyline, showcasing the powerful abilities of both Kryptonian heroes. Fans would likely be eager to see how James Gunn envisions this encounter in his DC universe, especially given his unique approach to storytelling and character dynamics. Additionally, the inclusion of Henry Cavill's Superman in Woman of Tomorrow could provide a connection to the broader DC universe and add depth to the narrative. It might also offer an opportunity to explore the mentor-student relationship between Superman and Supergirl, delving into the complexities of being a superhero in this cinematic universe. While the specifics of Henry Cavill's involvement remain uncertain, the prospect of Supergirl and Superman sharing the screen in Woman of Tomorrow adds an intriguing layer to the film and keeps fans eagerly anticipating its release. Snyder's Justice League arc was meant to span 5 movies, starting with Man of Steel and concluding with Justice League 3. The codex, introduced in Man of Steel, and Darkseid's quest for the anti-life equation were crucial elements in setting up Superman's descent into evil. Batman vs. Superman: Dawn of Justice further teased this storyline, indicating that Lois Lane's death and Darkseid's manipulation through the anti-life equation would lead to Superman becoming a formidable ally of Apocalypse. And that's that for today's video. Thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next one. Your suggestions for future videos are always welcome in the comments below.